Yeah.
No, I don't really know where I want to go.
My name is Chris Monsieur. I'm a faculty member in Civil Environmental Engineering. Together with my colleagues John Glebe, Rob Bertini, Miguel Filiozzi, and Jennifer Dill, we co-organized this Friday Transportation Seminar. So we're very pleased today to have Jamie Parks and Brian Ray from Kittelson Associates to present on transportation careers. And just a reminder, we do have people watching on the web, so make sure that you use the microphones, press the touch button with the red light come up. Otherwise, I'll come around with the portable mic. So with that, turn it over to Jamie and Brian.
Do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, sure. So I'm Jamie Parks, and as Chris said, I work with Kittelson Associates. I've been there now approximately 3 years. Prior to that, I got my master's in transportation from Northwestern University, where I did my research on quantifying the pedestrian environment and finding better ways to measure the pedestrian environment. And since I've been at Kittelson, I've worked on a little bit of everything that we do, but my focus is really on planning, and specifically on multimodal planning, and making sure to integrate the planning with sort of the engineering side.
And I'm Brian Ray. I'm actually a Portland State graduate, 1985, civil engineering, and I've been a consultant in my whole career. It's a pleasure to be here at Portland State. It's great to see how excellent the transportation program has evolved. The work that I do is, as a civil engineer, I do a lot of engineering work and a lot of design, traffic engineering, transportation planning, but I do a tremendous amount of planning in the work that I do. And so part of what Jamie and I are going to try to cover today is probably a different set of topics than maybe what we understand that you've usually had. We're not going to get into the technical areas. As a matter of fact, we're going to step it back a little bit. Is what we'd like to chat with you a little bit about are what are some of the issues that we see in transportation, and we'd like to hear from you. What are some of your perspectives? What do you see happening, and what are some of your concerns? We're going to try to walk through and maybe identify what are typical dichotomies that might be stereotypes about the profession or about the opportunities. We want to also just discuss with you about what are some of the attributes that we believe are important in a career in transportation. And at the end, what we'd like to do is create a forum where we could discuss with you the trends and the evolutions. And I hope what we can cover for you today, especially those of you who are thinking about your careers, you're trying to find out where you want to go, I hope what we can highlight are some of the changes, the dynamics, and maybe break down some of the stereotypes that as you are looking ahead to your own career, whether that's in planning, whether that's in engineering, that you can highlight some of the key issues that might help you focus in on the approach that you want to take. So Jamie and I are going to be trading off a bit. He's going to be leading some, I'll be leading some, we'll be doing some together, and I'll turn it over to Jamie now.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So as Brian said, we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the challenges that we see for the transportation profession, and specifically, some of the things that I think as a profession that we really need to work on. And I think what I want to highlight today isn't just that there are a lot of different challenges out there, because I think we all know that. I think the real issue is the complexity of those challenges and the fact that they are really all interconnected. So to start, I think we're all here because we're interested in transportation, and so we all realize that there are a lot of lot of different things that transportation affects, and there are a lot of challenges for the profession. But I still want to take a little bit of time and just go through some of the key issues just to make sure that we understand the full scope of what transportation is dealing with and the full complexity. So I think pretty much everybody is in favor of livability. And there are a lot of different ways to define livability, and I don't want to get into that, but I don't think that anybody would disagree with the idea of trying to provide livable communities. And I think when you start looking at what it is that livability means, that transportation really does come up to play a large role in a lot of different things that affect livability. So I'm going to go through a couple of those just quickly here. I think one of the first things that people often think of when they talk about livability and transportation is congestion. Every year the Texas Transportation Institute puts out a report that says that the American economy wastes so many billions of dollars on congestion every year, and we could quibble about the methods there and whether those really represent real economic costs or not. But I think we would all agree that there is some real economic cost to congestion. And for people sitting in traffic, when people are sitting in traffic and when freight is sitting in traffic, that's not a good thing. And moreover, it's not only affecting automobile drivers. The picture here shows a bus that's stuck in the traffic too. And so congestion often creates a positive feedback loop with transit, because transit may be disproportionately affected by increasing congestion, forcing people off transit and increasing congestion even more. And the final aspect of congestion, and really any time that we have people spending more time in their vehicles, is that it increases vehicle emissions and reduces air quality. And air quality is something that's, it's more than just an annoyance that smells really bad and makes you cough and prevented me from seeing the LA skyline when I got to the top of this hill and took this picture. Air quality is something that has a very real impact on public health and sickness and even death. And the impact or the effect of vehicle emissions on first air quality, then secondly on public health, is something that's been well documented in the research. And just as a quick example, I think is pretty striking. The Center for Disease Control's study of Atlanta during the 1996 Olympics showed that, as Atlanta implemented strong transportation demand management measures throughout the 2-week period for the Olympics, congestion went down. And as a result of that, actually during the Olympics, asthma-related hospital admissions for children reduced by as much as 40% in the city of Atlanta. So we can see that air quality does have a huge impact on public health and ultimately livability. Something to cover briefly is obesity. I think we're all aware of the obesity epidemic that's growing in America. And I certainly don't want to lay all of this at the hands of transportation. I think diet obviously plays a huge role in obesity, and ultimately the transportation doesn't affect all of our physical activity. But there is research out there that shows that as you build transportation systems that improves the bicycling and walking environment, people do bike and walk more. And there's less research, but a growing body of research that's showing that those ped and bike friendly transportation systems are actually improving public health as well. And just a final note is on safety, and I'm not going to bore you with the statistics or try to shock you with any gory photos, but I think it would suffice to say that we do have thousands of people dying on the roadways every year, and our transportation decisions are affecting thousands of lives. So that's something that we really can't take lightly. So those are all issues that's just livability, and that's already a lot of different issues that are already pretty complex. And one other thing I just want to touch on briefly is something that's been getting a lot more attention, I think, in recent years, and that's sustainability. And it's been getting that attention for good reason, I think. And when people talk about sustainability, the first thing that often comes to people's minds, myself included, is the environmental impacts of sustainability on natural resources, on pollution, on water quality. And obviously that plays a huge role in sustainability. But if you talk to people in the sustainability profession, they'll tell you that it's not just the environment, it's the full triple bottom line of environmental factors, equity, and economic factors. All of those need to be sustainable in order to create a stable system. And what's interesting for transportation, and I think that it makes transportation will play such a key role in sustainability, is that transportation decisions affect all three of these areas in very, very deeply. In the environmental areas, we've already discussed that. I think as far as equity, you have access to jobs, access to services, the economy, movement of people and goods. So transportation plays a huge role in sustainability. And when we look at these things, we have to be able to realize what the trade-offs are. And as sort of a side note on sustainability, I think it's kind of interesting that although we all talk about sustainability, I think it's very rare that we actually can measure sustainability. And I think if someone was to ask you what a sustainable transportation system actually looks like, we don't actually have the answer to that. And we don't know what the performance measures are to measure sustainability. So for anyone that wants a really good research project, I think this is a really great topic of research to explore, is how do we really measure sustainability and what does sustainability mean? But we're moving on to sort of the trade-offs. We've discussed a lot of huge issues that face transportation. And the key for these isn't that they're new, because I think we all know about them. The key is really the complexity of them, and then the fact that they're all interconnected. The fact that doing something to improve one outcome may not improve all outcomes, and in fact may have a deleterious effect on certain outcomes. For instance, at a small scale, you might think of, if you eliminate left turns at an unsignalized intersection, maybe you've improved safety. But at the same time, you're increasing out-of-direction travel, and you may be increasing congestion. And that's just a small example, but I think there are a lot of times where what you see is that the desires for the transportation system, aren't really compatible. And that what people want isn't, we can't give them everything that they want. And just a couple examples is people want more freeways, but they may not be willing to pay a toll to drive on them. And people want more transit, but they don't want to be taxed to support it. And similarly, something that I come across a lot in my work, a lot of different projects, and when I go to a public meeting, is that something that people always want is more parking and less traffic. And I think there's just really a disconnect there, that people don't understand that more parking usually means more traffic. And that's something that as a profession we need to work on, not just understanding these trade-offs, which is difficult enough, but also explaining the trade-offs to the public and making sure that they know that we can't necessarily we can't have our cake and eat it too. So moving along a little bit, I think all of the things that I've talked about so far are things that are pretty apparent. They're not new phenomena. They're issues that we've been dealing with for a long time. Congestion, safety, pollution, those aren't new. But when we look at how the profession is actually doing with those measures, we find that we're still really struggling to solve them. And I don't want to say that we're not making progress in a lot of areas, because we certainly are, but there's still some very daunting challenges ahead. And we look at, for just example, vehicle miles traveled, the graph here, or VMT. That's been outpacing population growth by a large amount for the last 25 years. And if you look at official projections, it's projected by the U.S. government to outpace population growth more than 2-to-1 over the next 25 years. And given our goals for the system that we've already discussed in terms of safety, congestion, and the environment, if this trend continues, we really don't have any hope at all of meeting those goals. And yet this is what we're still seeing happening. Another issue, the last slide showed that we're expecting 25% more people in the U.S. in the next 25 years. And more people is generally going to mean that we're going to have a need to have more transportation infrastructure, not less. But at the same time, what we're seeing is we can't even support the infrastructure that we have. We have the tragic example in Minneapolis is a more drastic example, but I think there are hundreds of similar examples across the U.S. The Sellwood Bridge right here in Portland is so deteriorated that you can't drive TriMet buses across it anymore. And it's not just a bridge issue. And we've got a map here of the CTA rail system in Chicago, and all the pink areas on the map are slow zones where trains are required to travel as slow as 6 miles an hour because the tracks have deteriorated so far. And when you have conditions like this, the transit system can't really hope to serve its role in role in the transportation system when you have trains going 6 miles an hour out to O'Hare Airport. There's no way that you're going to keep the freeway from being congested. So we need to figure out not just how do we put in new facilities. It's an issue of how do we keep up the facilities we already have. And finally, another huge issue is even if in the public realm we can't pay for the infrastructure we have, on a personal level we're paying more and more for transportation. The average household in the U.S. is now spending actually more than 20% on transportation, and for people between $20,000 and $50,000 in annual income, transportation costs are actually higher than housing costs, which is the first time that that's happened. So that's certainly an issue to deal with. Right. So far, I think this has been a pretty pessimistic speech and a little bit bleak. And I don't want it to be bleak. I think if we ended now, we'd all be a little bit depressed. But I think we're going to change gears a little bit from this point and talk more about what we can do to meet these challenges, because there are ways to meet these challenges. And that's sort of what the rest of this discussion is going to be about. We're going to facilitate that conversation. And the first thing we need to think about with these challenges is why aren't we meeting them? And I think a lot of the times the reason is because we don't know the answer. And if we don't know the answer, then that's a great place for additional resource and research into those areas. And that's an area where universities and research organizations can provide a huge amount of support. Similarly, we may know the answer, but we may not like the answer. And in that case, that's an issue when we go back to the trade-offs, and we need to really communicate the trade-offs to the public of, this is why we're doing what we're doing. It's not that we don't like you. We have to do this because this will get us where we want to go. And finally, there's an issue of paying for the answer. And I think every metropolitan area in the U.S. has a multi-billion-dollar log of unfunded transportation projects. I don't think you could find one that doesn't. And if you put those all together, you're going to really quickly realize that we can't possibly hope to build all of those unfunded transportation needs. So we have to figure out something else. And whether that's value engineering to figure out if there just places where we can cut costs, or if it's just a matter of we really need to establish our priorities and figure out what it is that we really desperately need and what it is that we just kind of want. So I'm going to stop here and let Brian take over a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the different roles that are available in the transportation profession and the different career choices that can help to solve these solutions, and try to talk about the different roles that people can play. So.
Well, as Jamie said, that if we ended the presentation where he had, it would be a pretty depressing day, and you'd all go home on the weekend and just think miserably about it. But that's the nice thing about I like about Jamie is I'm as optimistic as Jamie is realistic, and so I'm really a half-full kind of a guy. So I see all of these situations as the opportunity. And part of what we wanted to highlight for you was, in fact, that what Jamie was talking about, some of the challenges or the common elements that we have are livability and sustainability. And while we may not have the definition, I think we would all interpret that we do think those are positive qualities. What we want to chat about now is maybe a little bit about perceived dichotomies, and maybe I'll start with some of the interrelationship and some of the challenges that Jamie highlighted. Is it a transportation issue, or is it a land use issue? And is it land use driving the situation, or is it the transportation driving the land use? And this is really, as far as your career goes, and for those of you in the MERP program or those of you in the civil program, they're really interrelated, and they affect each other dramatically. And so part of what you're doing and part of what Jamie and I are going to try to highlight are that there aren't really these dichotomies, that in fact, the opportunity is that wherever you choose to go within the profession, you can have a positive impact and positive influence. And so what we often find is that many cases, the transportation work that we do as a consultant, sometimes that work is coming through to positively influence the environment. That maybe it's part of a redevelopment opportunity, it's part of something going on in the South Waterfront area, where the transportation component needs to be put in to help establish and be sure that the land use piece is there. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes we have the land use, but it's the transportation element that's out of place. it's too big, it's too fast, it's too cumbersome, or it's not enough, it's not adequate. And so for you in your career planning, it's not just as simple as the black and white of transportation versus land use. And that's really the same thing here about engineers versus planners. Again, one of the very unique and positive aspects that you have at Portland State is the great integration between the planning side, the urban studies, and the engineering. And it's extremely unique, and as you're looking out throughout the country, people look to Oregon, people look to Portland for that very unique, where people call us practically perfect Portland when we go out and teach classes, and because people look to the progress of what we're doing. And for you in your program here, what we want to emphasize is that it is the tremendous opportunities, that your planning side, that your transportation and linkage is good. So we just wanted to have a little fun and identify with you what are some of the stereotypes, or what are some of the things that you see about engineers or planners, and are they the same? Are they different? So I'm just curious, what are some of the stereotypes that we hear about from engineers, about engineers?
Maybe that they're just too quantitatively oriented, and they're all about moving cars around, and they're not thinking about the big picture.
That engineers are just car focused. We measure everything by level of service, about how many vehicles, but we're not sensitive to all of the user types. Yeah, that is a stereotype. How about planners? What are some of the stereotypes that we might have about planners, and maybe from the engineering side, or
Maybe they don't know how to quantify things well.
so the response was that planners don't know how to quantify things enough. And isn't that the case? What Jamie and I are going to highlight here for you is, in fact, that there's an extremely close relationship, we believe, between planning and engineering. And in our work, at least as consultants, we get a chance to work, obviously as consultants, but we get a chance to work with agencies and various groups. And what I want to characterize for you is, and this to me is exciting, is that there really is no clear distinction between planning and engineering. Jamie, I think you had characterized a little bit of how you saw the differences in.
Well, I think there are some differences between planning and engineering, but there may not be differences between planners and engineers nearly as much, because I think in most cases, a good planner has to be taking into account engineering, and a good engineer needs to be doing planning also. So that engineers and planners are really doing both things.
And at least what we find, and what we'd like you to know, is that for engineers, you're going to end up doing planning whether you think you want to or not. And I tell you, it's probably some of the most satisfying parts that I have as an engineer, is to get to do planning projects. And for you planners, that ability to have that quantify, that ability to have a sense of the reality, to be sure that what you're trying to consider, your policies, your objectives, that they are in fact implementable, that in fact that you can make the change that you want. And while this graphic may not be crystal clear, I think the concept might be. The graphic itself is what was a project that we worked on in Oregon here. This is Oregon City, and this is Oregon 213, and this is Interstate 205, and the Willamette River is right here. And we were tasked with working with the city as part of their transportation system plan, so a planning document, a long-range transportation plan for the city of Oregon City, to do a corridor study and a quantitative evaluation of Oregon 213. So it's a planning study that led us to do a quantified corridor evaluation. And while we were looking at Highway 213, while we were quantifying many of the issues, the engineering side, what we were really also identifying was the forensic. What kinds of things were happening out there? Why were things breaking down? Why were things going to be looking like they did in the future? And what we actually found then in looking at the solutions, or identifying the problem and rectifying the solutions, is in fact that many of the solutions were planning oriented. That in fact that we have Gladstone just across the river, almost a stone's throw across the river, and yet there's no way to get from Gladstone to this side of the city without getting onto the ODOT's facilities, to get onto Oregon 99 or to get onto I-205. That we also found that much of the traffic coming to and through the area is regional-oriented traffic, and that part of the breakdown of the freeway facility is in fact that the overall metro network was loading up. And that just generally speaking, and in fact that even in high programmed planned redevelopment areas, former mill sites, and what are very beautiful land use opportunities for infill development, nice mixed use locations, you can't get to it, and that there needs to be some changes in connectivity. So this is just a classic example of how engineering is really influenced by the planning, that you'll be a better engineer if you can do the planning, that our planning solutions are often influenced by the engineering. And as you're looking ahead for your own career, we'd like you just to recognize that, that one, in terms of partnerships, teamwork, or how you do your individual work will have a great influence on achieving things like the livability and sustainability.
Yeah, so similar to engineers and planners, I think where people often see a false dichotomy where maybe there isn't one, I think another area where this comes into play is public and private. And I think we'll do the same thing where we did with the engineers and planners, and maybe try to get one stereotype of what's going on in a public agency, or one stereotype of people that work in the public sector, if anyone has one of those.
So what are some of the things that, we're not saying they're true, but what are some of the things that we hear about, what do you hear about the public sector? What are the characteristics? What's it like?
Bureaucratic.
That it's bureaucratic, okay. Slow moving, lots of process, can't get things done. Bloated. That it's big and just cumbersome, okay. Any others? How about the private side? What are some of the stereotypes about the private sector? Profit, profit, profit. Only interested in one thing, profit. Okay, that's. What else? Does that profit come at the expense of anything? What might it come at the expense of?
Well, it would come at the expense of maybe. Oh.
Thank you, Chris.
Come at the expense of, say, the greater good for the public, perchance, at the expense of the greater good of the public.
So, looking for the dollar at the expense of the greater surroundings, being sure that the one project is successful in spite of what goes on around it. The quality, may not be there. Okay.
Unless you live in Portland.
Unless you live in practically perfect Portland, 3 Ps. Well, what Jamie and I want to highlight is, in fact, that it's not as clear cut as that. That for example, in the career side, whether you're working on the public side or the private side, for us as a consultants, so much of our work is with the agencies. We form partnerships, and we have the same objectives in trying to support good quality projects. Many public agencies are supplemented, in fact, by augmenting their staff, either specialists, Jamie in his ped bike area, or other leaders. And so there is, in fact, a tremendous partnership within the career. And so those of you who are interested in perhaps pursuing the public sector, what you might find is, in fact, you'll be dealing very much with the private side. Those of you who think you want to be in the consultancy or other areas, you will, in fact, be working and have the opportunity and the pleasure to work on the private side. But there's other pieces, too, that we want to capture, and I think that I'll cover the first one here, but is, really the city of Portland, if we think about what makes us so great, or what we think is we are, in fact, all served by good development. If we think about the Pearl District or the South Waterfront area, we all benefit, and that's a case where, while development has gone in, that development has created that infill to the community, eliminated some of the need for sprawl on the outside. Sure, the private companies have benefited, but we as a community have also benefited tremendously.
Yeah, I think, and the same thing goes really for private development, benefits from public services immensely. As I think we probably all realize that. But I was in a meeting just yesterday, actually, with 6 different developers out in Hillsborough, and they were discussing, the need to have, the need for public sewer improvements and public road improvements in order for their developments to occur. So I think, while the private and public side may quarrel quite a bit, I think they both need one another. And another area where I think where I think they need to work together is the area of public-private partnerships, which I think are coming more and more into play when it comes to trying to fund new transportation infrastructure. I know the red line out to the airport in Portland wouldn't have happened without a public-private partnership with Bechtel. And I know there's a lot of argument for not giving away our public assets to private companies, but I think there is a way for public-private partnerships to work to serve both the public and the private side.
And we just have, of course, the streetcar is just a great example of that integration of land use and transportation. I think I heard, paraphrasing a quote from Charlie Hales when he was with the city of Portland, trying to get the streetcar in. Is it Charlie? And I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry if you're out there, Charlie, watching this webcast. But essentially, it wasn't so much focused on how many people the streetcar carried, because he really was highlighting the importance of it was a land use decision. So it's very interesting that it's transportation and land use, but the streetcar itself, those permanent tracks, that was really what it was going to take, is to lock in the development and the energy to create the positive land use. So it really is that example of the public and private partnerships. And as you're looking at your career, thinking about your options, what we'd like to have you recognize or open up your mind is that maybe take away some of those perceptions, or misperceptions, we hope, but that also it gives you more opportunity to think about what are the different range of things you can do. Maybe there are more ways that you could explore your career interests than perhaps what you had thought in before.
And I think the final one of our three dichotomies that we wanted to highlight in this presentation were, we did the engineers and the planners, and we did the public and the private. And the final one that we want to talk about is the research and the application, because I think these are things that become really separated in a lot of people's minds. But in reality, they need to be integrated. They need to work together, because if they don't, then neither is really going to work well at all.
So what are some of the impressions or the stereotypes about research versus, say, practitioners or the application side? Anything about what are those unfounded stereotypes about researchers? Oh, we get hands are everywhere.
Yeah.
That the research that they do is often kind of idealistic and will not see immediate practical application.
It's maybe not practical. It's research for research's sake. It's research to keep somebody's hobby going or to focus in on energy or a specific area. Is that another hand?
Yeah, I mean, they're up in their ivory tower, and they're not dealing with the real world on an everyday basis, so they don't really know what's going on out there.
Ivory tower, yeah, just totally detached from what's really happening. And what about the side from the practitioners or the application base? What are some of the stereotypes there?
They're just sort of lemmings, and they keep repeating the same failed practices over and over again.
Repeating the failed practices, yeah, doing the same thing over and over again, and then wondering, why isn't the outcome any different? Absolutely.
Or they take a very incremental approach, and everything they do is very reactive and not progressive in any way.
Oh, yeah, sure. Incremental approach, just focusing on the problem at hand, maybe addressing what they see as the symptom, but not really what is the true issue. Yeah.
I think also a lot of copy and paste.
I'm sorry?
I have seen many reports with copy and paste.
A lot of reports with copy and paste, just kind of,
Not all of them, but
yeah,
some of them.
yeah, just regurgitating the boilerplate. Well, one of the things that we really enjoy, at least about working with our firm, is we get a chance to do the applications. We are consultants, but we also get a chance to do applied research. And for us, what we find is that it's really an enjoyable part of, at least of our firm, is to be able to work with applied research. It's really pulling those pieces together. It's really being sure that you're understanding what are the key needs and that the outputs that we have that can be used. And again, thinking about Portland State, many of you working in the ITS lab, much of your work is, it's not just abstract research. The work that you're doing and the data that you're collecting for the City of Portland's freeway network has real-time application. That's very much those benefits of some of the issues that Jamie was highlighting: sustainability, congestion, livability. So research and practitioners, that should go together. And as you're thinking about your careers, if you do want to take that research side, fantastic, you should. Be sure that you're also complementing that with the forums in which you can share your information, that you may have to help people understand how your research is going to be applied and how it can be usable for others. Those of you who want to get more into it and maybe less at the research side, you have to recognize that you can't stay stagnant, that our world is changing, that everything that we're doing is very dynamic, and research and staying on the cutting edge is a key part of keeping up with the ever-increasing complexity of the issues that Jamie had highlighted about the livability and the sustainability before.
And I think as a student, it's really easy to stay current in what's going on and keep apprised of new research. But once you get out into, if you choose the more practical application career path, it's really easy to forget about that and lose track of it, because no one's going to really force you to stay current. So it's really up to you to make sure that you keep apprised of what the new research is, what the new innovations are, and make sure that you're staying relevant with the changing field.
We have just two examples up here, but our profession is so dynamic, and the document on the left, the cover, if you can or can't see it, it's the cover of the FHWA, Federal Highway Administration's Roundabouts Information Guide, and it was published in the year 2000. And at the time, it was pretty progressive because the U.S. government realized that roundabouts were coming around, and there needed to be some documentation about what we could have for our U.S. practice. Well, it's 2008. Only 8 years later, we're involved already with the exercise of updating that guide. So in 8 years, a publication has changed. There's been enough research and technical information to identify that areas of the guide needed to be adjusted. And in fact, things are happening and moving along fast. This guidelines, this other document, you can't read it, but it's a document by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE, but it's context-sensitive solutions in designing major urban thoroughfares for walkable communities. And so it's interesting, to me what's interesting about that is road builders and people have been building streets for many, many years. And there are lots of good information about how to build streets. But the importance or the recognition of that livability side, that perhaps the way roadway designers and the way plans are prepared or the way the information is available to practitioners, that in fact maybe it's not complete, maybe it doesn't adequately serve all users, and by creating a forum or a format to pull a lot of this information together, that we can actually take what we've always been doing, road building or street building, but try to have the elements that can make it be, in this case, walkable communities, more fitting for the environment. But what's interesting to me about both of these documents is that while they're new, this one was just out within the last couple years, the ITE book, but even within that, there are lots of gaps. There's a lot of information that's not known, and there's a continual need for research. And so even within this document, when we talk about street trees, medians, pedestrian safety, a lot of the information that we might think about driver behavior and the operational effects of the geometrics about slowing drivers or changing driver behavior, a lot of the information in this document isn't in fact research. There's no strong data, and that just means that there's more opportunity for research. So that could be you as a practitioner getting engaged, working with your community, doing some of that work, or it could be you on the research side getting in to try to answer some of the questions out of both documents. So I'm going to switch out now. We've tried to emphasize a little bit about the careers. And what I wanted to just note here, just for you as you're thinking about where you might go in the future, we are consultants, and we're not suggesting that this is the way things are, but maybe just some different ways to think about it. But there's plenty of opportunities for you to find your fit. And that's the key point, whether you're planning or engineering or health sciences, whatever that might be, there's plenty of opportunity for that. And what the key part for you is, what are the attributes of what we've seen? What are the parts that you value the most? What are the ways that the environments in which you like to work? Is for you to think about that and to start focusing your career and your guidance in that way. And so we just highlighted as 4 general areas, but if you do enjoy that research, you do like the applications, you do like the science, you do like that investigation and that being on the cutting edge, tremendous opportunity. But teaching, being in the academic side, what a wonderful experience of developing the profession, creating that learning environment, supporting the future, being engaged in supporting the research and sharing that knowledge. Economic development, yes, that can occur on the private side, but that can occur through redevelopment agencies or other groups.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to quickly apologize for a picture of a Bimart there with a surface parking lot. I couldn't find one of a multi-level condo next to transit with ground floor retail. So please fill in your own high-quality economic development when you look at that picture.
Thank you, Jamie, for keeping the world clear.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's public service. And there's a great part of working within an agency, a planning agency, city, county, federal. There's a tremendous amount of reward that can come from having that ownership, being engaged within a community, managing and monitoring. And I think it's a little bit of what you'd highlighted, that maybe the perception is that if in the public versus private, or getting in and out, or that practitioner, that you're solving a problem, where here in the public service side, you can be establishing the programs, making the change, monitoring that year after year, and having progress. What we noted here was just, at least within consulting, it provides a bit of a variety to get into any of these areas that oftentimes in public service you may be held within the boundary of your jurisdiction or the different limitations. But again, there's a tremendous amount of variety, and the key for you is to identify what are the attributes that are most interesting to you, and to push forward with that.
All right, so thanks, Brian. So we're going to finish up here with a couple minutes of discussion about some of the key skills that are going to be needed no matter what career path you end up taking. And the first thing we really want to talk about is communication. I know for instance, we talked earlier, I think one of the stereotypes about planners was that they didn't understand the quantitative analysis that engineers are putting out there. But I think that also means that engineers need to really be able to communicate their quantitative analysis, both not just to planners but also to the public. And that means, verbal skills and written skills. I think people that come into Kittelson to be engineers, went through an engineering program where they did almost no writing, and they're surprised to find out that about 75% of the stuff they do in their first few years is actually writing documents. So, it's written communication and verbal communication, not just to whatever project teams you're working on or your clients, but it's also communication to the public to talk about the trade-offs that we discussed earlier, to make sure that they're aware of what you're doing and why you're suggesting the things that you might be suggesting. And collaboration also, or integration. I think we discussed that earlier with our false dichotomies that we talked about, that no one has all of the answers. I think practitioners need research and engineers need planners, and it all goes back and forth, and there just needs to be collaboration, both within your field, work with other engineers, but also broaden yourself out beyond just engineering to look at a bigger picture. And I think as students, you're probably all really familiar with the latest technology and tools and innovation, and that's easy at this point in your career, but it doesn't take long once you leave school before you start really developing habits of using the same things that you used when you were in school. And I've only been out of school for 4 years, and I can already see myself sometimes falling into that pattern if I'm not careful. So it's just it's just something you need to be aware of, to make sure that you are keeping up to date with not just research, but also new technology and new tools that are available. And I think what goes along with improving the collaboration is improving partnerships and just making sure that that you are incorporating best practices into your work. And also, I think it's important to not focus strictly on the United States, but make sure look abroad. I mean, when you try to apply things to an American context, you need to think a lot about it and make sure that it'll work in an American context also. Because it works somewhere else, it may not work in the U.S. But especially maybe for multimodal transportation, I think Europe and Asia are ahead of us in many ways, and it's a good idea to look there. But when we do look there, it's also important that we repeat their successes and not their mistakes, because just because a bike facility is in Northern Europe doesn't make it a good bike facility. And we've got a couple examples here of one which I think is a good example, and the one on the left here is a sort of a state-of-the-art cycle track that they're now building in the Netherlands, which have pretty high safety records, and cyclists report feeling very comfortable on them. And on the right, we have a contraflow cycle path that was installed in Paris, France, probably probably within the last 10 years. I'm not sure of the actual date. And the contraflow lane itself is, I think, of dubious safety with the curbs and the door zone. But what's even more striking about it is that, I don't know if you can see here, but the lane itself terminates directly into an on-street parking lane. And the last bike stencil is no more than 15 yards from the front of the bumper of that car. And if you're a bike going down that street, I don't really see where you can possibly go, either safely or legally, when you reach the end of that. So when you design your facility, make sure that you've got a success and not a mistake. So I think that kind of brings us close to the end of our presentation. I just wanted to highlight once again that this profession, transportation, really is about serving people. It's not just serving your clients and your projects, but transportation really serves the general public at large. And that doing what's best for the general public or doing what's best for the transportation profession as a whole isn't necessarily what's the easiest thing to be doing. So that concludes what we had to present formally today. So I think we want to try to open it up and start developing more of a discussion related to a couple of questions that we have here.
And these were just meant to prime the pump of discussion, but we welcome any questions about anything that we've talked about. And Jamie and I don't profess to think that what we've shared with you is the right thing. It was really just offering a perspective. We'd really welcome your own opinions or different opinions of that matter.
Yeah, back to the communication that you were discussing, and I'm going to disagree with you and say that engineers do pretty much know everything. But is there a way, is the kind of the tools of the trade, or from your experience, are there any, say, ideas that you can give us in order to increase that communication from engineering into, say, the public sector, or maybe even the lay sector, trying to how to communicate what we see quantifiably into, say, plain language?
Well, I'll offer maybe a couple, and Jamie, why don't you jump in? But I think that even in school, there's some of the smallest steps that you can take. Is that you can try to ask a question in class. Sometimes you're in a classroom with 30, 40, or 200 people if it's an engineering econ or something like that, and there's so many people. But sometimes people just get that nervousness of asking a question in public, and when you're asking that question, to think a little bit about projecting and to ask it clearly and concisely. I know that might sound a little bit trite, but it's a simple environment in which you can put yourself in and where you feel a little uncomfortable. It's participating in group discussions. This is a wonderful forum, and I know in Portland State there are many of those. But go to those forums and make yourself participate. Try to share a point of view. Get involved with a professional society or a charity group or some activity in which you believe is strongly. Get up to announce what the events are going to be for that afternoon. I know these are very small. I'm trying to actually give you small bite-sized pieces. But I think also if you can and you have the opportunity to be an officer in these groups or take charge as a leader in these groups, if you're doing class projects or demonstration or group projects and it's time to report back out to ODOT if you're in the ITS lab, or to report back out, take the time to be the one to present. I mean, of course, give your teammates opportunities to present, but take the time to do that. And all of these are small steps that you can take that will just really increase your ability to get out there. I know I'm trying to give you really small pieces, but those are a couple that I can highlight right now, because you will be so surprised about how much time you take with the public being stakeholders, decision makers. We constantly speak in public all the time.
And I think something that I would just highlight, and I think I mentioned earlier, is just the real importance of writing skills for engineers. I think it's something that's not highlighted in the curriculum at all. But sometimes when you finish that perfect spreadsheet, you know that it's perfect, but that's not something that can be consumed by the public or really by your client. You have to find a way that you can explain it in simple terms, and it's really often going to come down to just being able to explain it in writing and learning how to write really well. And that's something that I think everyone struggles with their writing skills, but it's something you can build over the course of a career.
Actually, I'd keep going. I'm still improving my writing skills. It's a never-ending exercise. You aspire to be an excellent writer.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to add a comment too that you should be aware of learning styles. And so some people are auditory learners, some people are visual, some people are kinesthetic, some people are hands-on. So when you're putting together a presentation, trying to appeal to as many of those as you can, and also be more effective in communicating ideas.
Well, that's a really great point, and that's something that comes up so much within the public or in a group environment, is just recognizing that people do have such different skills, and some people listen and listen and listen and listen, and you may not think they're even engaged, but in fact they're the type of person who is absorbing all of that, and they're processing it, and it's amazing that if you can give them the opportunity to share what you can get from them. But if you're in a public environment, sometimes what you're hearing isn't what they're saying, it's the emotion. They just simply need to get that emotional piece out. And that's so valuable for you to be able to understand that you don't have to necessarily respond exactly to what they're saying at that particular second. It's you need to let them get that expression out and then listen to what they were trying to say. So I really appreciate that point. So much of the work that we do is collaboration. It's teams, it's with your clients, it's with your constituents. And that communication, the styles, and recognizing is so critical for the success. And one of the pieces that Jamie and I had highlighted here in that second bullet was just recognizing that, gosh, increasingly we have such a globalized profession. Jamie and I, and some of you were at Transportation Research Board. It's just fascinating to realize that our transportation profession is being influenced and affected by so many some diverse international partners, and so I think it's going to be very interesting to see, and I welcome your ideas about what do you think the international and the globalization is going to do to affect our profession. I'm just curious about your perspectives, or again other questions that you have about things that we've shared.
You mentioned a divide between land use planning and transportation planning, and I'm working on a research project for the Columbia River crossing, the I-5 interstate bridge. And it seems like there's a divide between the land use planning going on in Portland, Multnomah County, and the bridge itself, and what happens in, say, Clark County. So how do you bridge some of those divides, say in policy or in like a greenhouse gas policy, how it applies to transportation policy? And so it's kind of a broad question, but I'm kind of looking where I want to go in my career.
Yeah, see now the half full part of me says that's a great career opportunity, because what a fantastic situation. We have the Portland metro area that is so influenced, yet we have this state line that goes through that river. In Clark County, the state of Washington has a whole different set of policies and approaches and really philosophies if you think about the citizens. And yet they're an integral part of the transportation and land use community, workforce, housing, employment, etc. So sometimes that can be, I think it can be frustrating when you're on a project and you watch and you see some of the separation. But I guess I would turn that around to the opportunity part of that, is to recognize, boy, isn't there a lot of work to be done? And while we can talk about very progressive things that need to happen, there's still so much more that needs to happen to better integrate our policies, our communities. And for example, in the metro area, is just recognizing and getting away from that artificial state line that's in the Columbia River, and recognizing that how we live and breathe, the air we have, our economy, our success is really jointly. And all of those, I don't have the answers for all of those. I was curious, Jamie?
Certainly those are all huge questions that I don't think anyone has the full answers to. But I think a lot of it may come down to making sure that we're asking the right questions in the planning process, that we're not asking if we can build a bridge big enough to carry 1 million cars a day. If we're asking questions if we can build a bridge that will get us to where we want to be, or will solve certain problems. And then when we evaluate the bridge, just to make sure we're evaluated on the level of, does this solve the issues that we actually want to solve, or is it solving something arbitrary?
From your experience, what are the most important skills that should be available or found in a person to be a successful professional?
Oh, the question is, what skills or traits do we see in individuals to give them the opportunity to be successful? Well, of course, that is about as as subjective and arbitrary as it can be. But I think that at least in our profession, I think a natural curiosity about what we're doing, an interest, a genuine interest to strive to make things better, that you feel like you're contributing and that you're on a mission. I think it's a genuine interest and concern outside your own particular focus area in realizing that what you're doing is greatly influenced by and influences many other pieces. I think it's ability to work hard. I think there are many, many challenges, and none of us can do it all in a 8-to-5 day, and there has to be some persistence and an ability to really stay at it all of the time. Those are just some quick thoughts that I have. Jamie?
Yeah, I would agree with what Brian said. I think the most important thing is just making sure that if you have a strong interest and you have a broad perspective in the transportation field, you're going to find an area or a niche that works well for you. And there may be different ones for different people, but I think just having the real strong interest and the curiosity is going to let you get where you need to be.
And I think, I've used the term attributes, and for you to think about what are the qualities or attributes you have, turn that into a passion. Jamie has a passion for peds and bikes, and it comes out in everything he does. Each of you may have a real strong interest, but turn that into a passion. I think what you'll find is, as you're talking with future employers and as you're trying to get your career started, people will genuinely appreciate and they'll lock on to that genuine passion you have. And each of you may have your own passion about a specific topic or a specific area. But when that comes through, when we look at candidates or we meet students or just our colleagues, those people who have that energy and that passion about what they're interested in, it's catchy, it's fantastic, and it's very attractive to people in the career. And people can appreciate it. They may not agree with you, but they can appreciate your passion.
I really appreciated that you brought up some examples from different countries and how we can apply those here in the U.S. I recently spent 2 years in Asia, and one of the things I noticed there was that they do some of their public transportation very, very well, but some of the reasons for that are because they have things that we don't in the U.S., like greater population densities, governments that are focused on public works projects, and even sort of a cultural mentality of using those projects. So how can we take the success stories we see there and still apply them to the U.S. settings?
Sure, I can say I think there are always going to be cultural differences. I mean, even within the U.S., you're going to find that something that works in Portland may not work elsewhere in the United States. So I think we have to take into account cultural differences. And I think when it comes to things like population density, that's not a cultural difference. That's just a physical difference that we may need to look at. Well, if for whatever reason we think we need to achieve the types of transit ridership that Asia has achieved, then maybe we need to quadruple our population density. And that may not be the right answer, but those are the type of things that we need to start thinking about. So figuring out, I guess, separating out the cultural differences that won't transfer and then the physical differences that would transfer if we just did things differently in our country.
And I think, in the United States, I think one of the first pieces is just to recognize that we're not, that we don't know everything. That sounds pretty trite, but in fact, there's so much to learn from other countries. And so I think one is recognizing that just because it's what we do in the United States doesn't mean it's the correct thing to do and that we can't enhance it. I think also that it's learning from and extracting the best qualities of the things that we're seeing from other countries. And as Jamie said, culturally we're probably not going to get that kind of density, but let's extract the positive pieces of it. Are there technology elements to it? Are there programmatic ways that we would want to extract that? So I think those are a couple pieces that, in my mind, come to play. The other part, though, is it's a little bit frustrating for me, or it's interesting but frustrating for me. Just we need to learn from our own mistakes. That's a key part. I have the opportunity to work up in Alaska. I love Alaska. I love everybody up in Alaska. But it's really interesting to watch how a community up in Alaska is still in a very high road building, that low level of high quality level of service C as an objective during this forecast year in an urban area, very freeway-dominated mentality. And it's a little bit disappointing to me to think that, my gosh, many, many communities are finally understanding that you can't build your way out of congestion. You can't just build major roadway, car-oriented infrastructure. But there are places who feel like it's It's our manifest destiny, darn it. We're going to have some freeways, and we're going to have some interchanges, and we're going to have our cars go real fast. And we should, learn from those mistakes and be real critical. Have the confidence and the courage to take self-assessments of what we do. And there's nothing wrong with critiquing ourselves. It's the best way that we can look ahead.
Is there good communication between like the U.S. and other countries, like where you work and stuff? Do you guys do research in that area?
I think there can be. In a lot of cases there are. In a lot of cases there aren't. It really depends on your specific project and what exactly you're working on. No, I'm working on a transit research project right now where one of the first things we did, as you do in almost all research projects, is the literature review. But one of the key parts of our literature review is an international literature review. So in this particular case, yes, we are looking abroad and we're seeing what other countries are doing in this particular area. But I think there are a lot of cases where that just doesn't happen, and it should happen more often.
I think there are more and more tendencies towards international collaboration in the forums. The Transportation Research Board I had mentioned before is a great example that it is in fact international. The challenge is, I think, if I had to think about emerging trends or what I'd like to see, would be more forums, and what are the kinds of things, for example, that Portland State can be doing to be interacting with the relationships that Chris and Robert and others have in the transportation community, and how do you leverage those to get the exchanges? I think that, to me, is an exciting part of the future. I think we're at about the hour, but I guess if we're not limited, if there's a few more questions, we'll sure take them.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the presentation was this idea that there's a disconnect between things that we say we want as a society, but what we're actually willing to implement. Like, for example, we want fewer vehicle miles traveled, yet we build more parking spaces, or we build more road capacity based on what we project that we're going to need, rather than what we decide we value in the future. And I'm just wondering, is that a way? Is that just kind of another one of those dichotomies that we need to find a way to bridge, as far as projecting practical things versus making values decisions? I mean, what do you think?
I think for me, a lot of it is that it might mean that as a profession we're not really communicating the choices well enough to the public. That if maybe the public doesn't really understand what an increase in vehicle miles traveled per capita means, or why they should care if they're driving 22 miles a day compared to 19 miles a day 10 years ago. So I think if we can explain why we really need to reduce VMT, then we can, once the public agrees that that's our goal and that's what we need to do, then I think that we as a society would be willing to take the steps necessary to actually get there. But until people understand why they need to do it, they're not going to really be making those changes.
I think it's human nature to not want change, and so if we often go out to a community and it's a corridor study or an intersection evaluation, and it's unsafe and it's tough for the kids to get across, and people don't feel comfortable there, and they want it changed better, and they want it safer, and they want it to move more efficiently, but they want it to be exactly like it is today. That's that part of people are afraid of the actual change, and that takes confidence to want some change. Question in the back?
Yeah. I was thinking about your question about what are the effects of globalization, and we've seen a lot of it where people travel to Asia and they do their international research, or they use the web for international research, and they have international forums, so we get a lot more international ideas, so there'll be a lot more innovation kind of locally that we'll get to see. And I think that'll obviously continue. But one of the things that I think we pretty much have to start to see is kind of international standardization. I was wondering, have you seen that at all, or what are your thoughts about what's the trend for that?
I don't know if there's, that's a pretty broad statement, but it's interesting. There are some standard, I don't want to call it standardization, but assimilation. If we think about some of the signing and striping that occurs in traffic engineering, some of the symbols that we have for example, the modern roundabout, some of the the basic symbols that we have, internationally. And I know these are real simple examples from maybe what you're highlighting. But there are, in fact, some similarities in assimilation, and I think that to me is something that we need to understand, that part of, for example, for me as a roadway designer, I need to be sure that the facilities, whatever their type for all users, that they're consistent, they're self-describing, they're self-enforcing. And as we think more about a globalization, there needs to be that consistency, that somebody coming from a different country can operate our vehicles, can ride our trains, can figure out how to rent a bike in Portland, and, those kinds of things. So I think there's opportunities. To me, it's not even close to being scratched yet.
So I think before we thank our speakers today, I just want to announce that next week's presentation will be from, and I'm probably not going to say this name right, Erica Timberbacka from the established United Logistics Groups in Finland, talking about sustainable urban logistics. So with that, let's give Brian and Jamie a round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you very much for indulging us today and letting us have this free forum to talk about such fun stuff. So we really appreciate it.